You think you're a Bayley fan, huh? Well, in this video, I'm going to test your loyalty. I'm going to test your knowledge because Bayley is in a very interesting spot in her WWE career. 2024 is shaping up to be the year of Bayley. The year of Bayley starting out by winning the Women's Royal Rumble match, by earning the right to challenge Io Sky for the Women's Championship at WrestleMania 40 in Philadelphia. And now we're into the next stage of her tenure as the champion, because it's ironic that in 2022 in the summer, not only did she bring back a Dakota Kai who had been fired by WWE, she also brought back Io Sky, who was believed to be on her way out of the company at the time. And since then, she had been pushed as a worthy title contender, mixing it up in the main event scene for the top prize in the women's divisions across Raw and SmackDown, while also being a guiding light, a leader for Io Sky and a Dakota Kai. They eventually brought back Kairi Sane from New Japan or Stardom, whatever you want to call it. They're the same promotions, essentially. They're owned by Bushiroad. Anyways, and now you had a dominant run, and yeah, she came up short a few times during her hunt to become champion while as a heel. Once she won the Women's Championship, won the Royal Rumble match, you knew that she was going to win the Women's Championship from Io Sky because they started to plant those seeds, and eventually we got that at WrestleMania 40. Now, coming out of that show, I felt like Io Sky earned the right to get an immediate championship match. Give her a rematch for a title in which she held. I'm a strong believer in that the champions should most of the time get a rematch for their titles. But I get it, sometimes those situations don't call for it. WWE has different ideas. They don't want to beat the previous champion once again. I get it, right? And in the case of Io Sky, I get it. And now we're in this next stage because coming out of WrestleMania, Bayley, she had this frenemy relationship with Naomi going into Mania and especially coming out of Mania, because Naomi was like two baby faces, her and Bayley, but both want to be champion. And so eventually they're going to have to wrestle each other, right? And so going into Backlash France, we have Tiffany Stratton entering a triple threat match with Bayley and Naomi. Now, coming out of that show, we know that WB went with an interesting decision to not pin Tiffany Stratton in this match. Instead, they had a quick roll-up victory for Bayley over Naomi, despite the fact that we're eventually getting that match. I felt like they fell a little short on getting heat on the finish, because I felt like Tiffany was being booked in that spot to eat the pin, and you could have booked her in a protective way where it wouldn't have hurt her necessarily. Plus, she's a heel. She can always get out of it by talking her way out of it. On the flip side, you also take away from Naomi, considering she's supposed to be the next challenger. So it's like, well, what are we doing? So this is the truth about Bayley. Bayley has always been looked over by fans. Going back to NXT, she will always be part of the four horsewomen of WWE, alongside Sasha Banks, aka Mercedes Moné, Charlotte Flair, and Becky Lynch. And even in NXT, she was always the overlooked one, right? It wasn't until those women were really out of the scene that she blossomed, right? If you have not, I highly recommend go back, TakeOver SummerSlam weekend, I think it's TakeOver Brooklyn, 2015, Bayley, Sasha Banks, women's title, one of the greatest sheer wrestling matches that you will ever see in your life. I love that match. But when it comes to Bayley, she was overlooked in NXT. People thought Charlotte Flair was a bigger star. People thought Becky Lynch was a bigger star. And people knew the potential that Mercedes Moné, Sasha Banks, had. The charisma in which she has is unprecedented. Right? Charlotte Flair, she was already crowned the queen of WWE. You knew that WWE was going to do big, big things with her. And Becky Lynch, well, she was still trying to find her way, but everyone knew she was special. And then you had Bayley, right? And even going to the main roster, she was always considered the fourth best. And I think partially the reason for that is due to her gimmick. If you looked at her gimmick in NXT, if you looked at her gimmick on the early stages of her main roster tenure, it was a lovable babyface who kind of gave you teenage vibes, who was just, she couldn't win the big one kind of thing. And even when she did win the big one, she would get screwed over by having the big one, right? That was just kind of her status quo. That was her calling, if you will. And so once she got to the main roster, yeah, she found success, but it wasn't necessarily the success that Bayley fans wanted or even thought that she could live up to, right? But then, a few years ago, when she finally turned heel for the first time in her WWE career, she not only turned heel, but she did so by digging at fans, right? She blamed the fans. This was during a time in which Vince McMahon forcefully, every heel had to blame the fans for everything, right? It wasn't their fault. It wasn't someone else's fault. It was the fans' fault. It's like, Jesus Christ, give it up now. But she, she popped the inflatable entrance guy thingy-majigs. That was fun. And her feud with Michael Cole during the pandemic was absolutely hilarious. Bayley, once turning heel, and really during the pandemic, which was a god-awful time for everyone involved, right? For us, for them, it was just a bad time in human society. But what Bayley was able to do during the pandemic era was truly remarkable because her character work was phenomenal. She was one of the highlights of the pandemic era. She was one of the saviors, if you will, of the pandemic era. Her taking shots at Michael Cole was always hilarious. She got to have a long pairing with Sasha Banks, and that was fun. Whether it would be, Sasha supporting Bayley in a singles match, vice versa, or even when they were champions as the women's tag team champions. So that was a really fun time. But Bayley, I feel like, despite the fact that she had a very strong run in NXT, the fact that she had a pretty decent run on the main roster as a babyface, she had an even better run as a heel on the main roster. I feel like 2024 is like her crowning moment. People are starting to recognize, okay, this girl, not only is she one of the best pure in-ring wrestlers in the world, but she is a character. And in a day and age where I think WWE, AEW, New Japan, all these promotions are more reliant than ever on reality-based people and gimmicks, they just, intensify the personality of the person, the wrestler. I think Bayley is doing a much better job at actual gimmick work and character work over the last, let's say, 5 years or so. You could even make the case her entire career. But 2024 is her crowning achievement. It's her crowning moment, and I cannot wait to see what is next for Bayley.